Thank you all for joining us here today. My name is Mark Cowan. I'm the director of the California Department of Water Resources. Our agency is responsible for planning for and managing California's water resources. And in addition to that, we operate the State Water Project, which of course delivers water to more than 25 million Californians and about 1,000 square miles of irrigated farmland. I want to start by introducing my colleagues with me here today. I've got Felicia Marcus, Chair of the State Water Board, Tom Howard, Executive Director of the State Water Resources Control Board, Karen Ross, Secretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture, Chuck Bonham, Director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we're also joined today by our federal counterparts, David Murillo, Regional Director of the Bureau of Reclamation, Dan Castleberry, Assistant Regional Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Maria Ray, Assistant Regional Administrator for NOAA Fisheries. So as everyone is aware by now, on January 17th, Governor Brown issued an emergency proclamation of drought in response to what is projected to be California's driest year on record. We should all be clear by now that this is not a coming crisis, this is not an evolving crisis, this is a current crisis. So consider these facts. We have 17 water agencies across the state that are in danger of running out of drinking water in the next 60 to 100 days. More agencies are going to be added to this list on a weekly basis. Our most recent snowpack survey conducted just yesterday showed snowpack levels of 12% of normal for this time of year. That level is far less than any snowpack level we've measured even during the state's worst droughts in modern history. Wildfire risk has spiked. Since January 1st, we've had 400 fires have burned across the state, and compared to last year when we had 0 fires during January. Simply put, there's very little water in the state's rivers and reservoirs. Most of California reservoirs are well below their average for this time of year. Overall storage is the lowest we've seen for this time of year since the 1970s. A few examples. We've got some graphics here that display some of the major storage reservoirs around the state. Shasta and Lake Oroville, our state's 2 largest reservoirs, stand at 36% of capacity. And here close to home, Folsom Lake is at 17% of capacity. Many of California's rivers and streams, which provide essential habitat for endangered and threatened species, are running very low, and in response, yesterday the California Department of Fish and Wildlife closed several rivers to fishing, and will ask the Fish and Game Commission next week to consider closing additional rivers. Farmers that rely on surface water for irrigation are faced with the decision to plant crops amidst great uncertainty whether or not state and federal water projects will be able to deliver any water they need to supplement local supplies to grow their crops. The small amount of rain that we received this week, as I think you all have accurately reported, is less than a drop in the bucket compared to the drought situations that we're facing right now. Considering that we are now 2/3 through the wet season, the state would have to experience heavy rainfall and snowfall every other day through May in order to just get us back to average precipitation levels. And even then, we would still face drought conditions because of the recent dry years that we started the year off with. One of the most important lessons that we've learned from previous dry years, including the 1976-77 drought of record, is that delay exacerbates the effect of drought. So we're here today to announce aggressive actions that first and foremost protect public health and safety. That means making sure that the state maintains its ability to protect water quality for Californians who rely in whole or in part on the Delta to have adequate, clean drinking water. Just like the governor has asked all Californians to conserve water around their homes, we're taking the same sort of aggressive actions at the state level on a much larger scale. Today's actions mean that everyone, farmers, fish, people in our cities and towns, will get less water as a result, but these actions will protect us all better in the long run. Simply put, there's not enough water to go around, so we need to conserve. To start with, in terms of specific actions, I'm announcing today that the Department of Water Resources is adjusting its initial allocation for projected deliveries of State Water Project water from 5% to 0. This is the contracted amount of supply that we deliver from year to year. We had an initial allocation in December of 5%, so today we take the necessary action to reduce that projected allocation to our State Water Project contractors that reside south of the Delta, from the Bay Area to Los Angeles to San Diego and Kern County, to 0 for this year. This means that we're projecting no water to be delivered if these conditions persist. With the exception of limited water supplies that were saved by some of these agencies that is now in storage in San Luis Reservoir south of the Delta, and the minimal deliveries for human health and safety that we will deliver as we identify where those needs exist. This is the first time in the 54-year history of the State Water Project that projected water supplies for both urban and agricultural users have been reduced to 0. These areas will need to continue to heed the call for water conservation and rely on water saved in groundwater, basins, and local reservoirs, as well as recycled water and stormwater capture. In addition, our department is also notifying its settlement contractors along the Feather River that per our contracts with the state of California, their supplies are also likely to be reduced by 50%. These water supplies are mostly for farmers in Butte, Sutter, and Yuba counties, and we have not made this reduction in their supplies for over 20 years. A formal notification will be made after we process information from yesterday's snow survey. And as always, we will continue to make adjustments to these projected deliveries as conditions play out throughout the rest of the winter and early spring. In addition to these actions, my department and the Bureau of Reclamation have submitted a petition to the State Water Resources Control Board to adjust operations to address the current severe drought conditions in 2 ways. First, our petition asks the State Water Board to let us slow down the release of the little water we have left in storage in our major reservoirs. Otherwise, outflow requirements that would go into effect as of February 1 would require us to release that water now. The amount usually required to be released from reservoirs for outflow at this time of year was set assuming typical dry year conditions, and obviously these drought conditions are of much greater magnitude, and conditions are much different than those assumed when those regulations were drafted. This slower release of water that we are requesting will meet the basic standards for keeping salt out of the Delta and back into San Francisco Bay. It's necessary for us to maintain fresh water within the Delta because of its importance as the main hub of the state's water supply. Keeping the salt water out makes sure we can deliver a minimum amount of water to people and saves our precious storage for later in the year for families, farmers, and fish. Failing to take this action could result in our reservoirs running out of water later in the year, which means no available water to prevent saltwater intrusion in the Delta. That would result in ruined water supplies for users, both in the Delta and south of the Delta, and major environmental impacts. Our petition also asks the State Board to let us open and close a key gate in the Delta called the cross-channel gate. It's usually closed this time of year. If I could step away from the microphone, might help explain the situation. So let's see. Here is the cross-channel gate. Generally this time of year, inflows from the Delta and other tributaries allow enough freshwater flow through the Delta to repel salt that tends to intrude from the bay into the Delta. This cross-channel gate is closed to protect migrating juvenile salmon that make their way down the river this time of year, keep them from entering the interior Delta where mortality is higher. So the rules generally call for these gates to be closed at this time of year to protect salmon, knowing that other inflows to the Delta will help repel salinity back to the bay. With these low inflows that we're facing right now, we're asking for permission to open this gate periodically in order to allow more freshwater flow into the Delta to help repel salinity. That will, of course, put juvenile salmon at risk, so we propose to work very closely with NOAA Fisheries, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and California Department of Fish and Wildlife on a real-time basis to monitor the situation and limit impact to those fish. So we can talk more about that if that wasn't clear enough. The actions I've described today and the petition to the State Board are largely unprecedented, but also unavoidable. As I mentioned earlier, we have learned from previous record dry years, such as 1976 and 77, that early aggressive action is critical to manage drought impacts. In 1977, urban conservation in California amounted to a one-year reduction in water usage of 1 million acre-feet. That's tremendous. Had such conservation levels taken hold in the previous year, 1976, the drought effects wouldn't have been so severe in 1977. Thank you all for helping us get the message out that everyone needs to pitch in now to help us through this crisis. And now I'd like to introduce David Murillo, Regional Director of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. David.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning. As Mark stated, I'm with the Bureau of Reclamation, and we're part of the Department of Interior family. The Bureau of Reclamation is fully committed to continuing our close partnership with the State of California and the Department of Water Resources. This commitment is particularly important during times like these as we face potentially devastating drought impacts throughout the state. As the agencies that manage the federal Central Valley Project and the State Water Project, Reclamation and DWR are working cooperatively to make the best possible decisions for the management of California's water supplies for the good of our people, communities, agricultural businesses, power, imperiled species, and the environment. The state has just announced an adjustment to their water allocation for the State Water Project. When we provide our allocation for the CVP, Central Valley Project, in late February, it will no doubt be a difficult announcement. As the Director Cowan just described, the joint petition filed by Reclamation and DWR with the State Water Resources Control Board on January 29th is an example of our strong commitment to doing all that we can do to make the best possible use of our crucial water supplies. Thank you very much, and now I'll turn it over to Felicia.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I'm Felicia Marcus, the chair of the State Water Resources Control Board, often called the State Water Board. The State Water Board is charged with protecting California's water quality and water rights system. Tom Howard, the executive director of the State Water Board, is here as well and will be explaining the action today that he is taking under his delegated authority and for temporary urgency authority. I'd like to focus briefly first on the overall situation we find ourselves in and also talk about actions that the Water Board is taking in the coming weeks. It's important to note that our board meets in public and it makes decisions in open session. And I'm not speaking for the board here and will not speak directly to the order. My colleagues and I will have the opportunity to review the order and any comments received from the public in the coming days. As Mark explained and David explained, this is the most serious drought we've faced in modern times, and we'll have to face it head on and make many hard decisions in the days, weeks, and months to come. We have little water in storage and minimal snowpack. Because it may not rain or snow, we need to conserve what little we have to use later in the year or even for use in later years. Doing so will allow water managers to prevent saltwater intrusion and protect drinking water supplies when we most need to for as long as possible, and also preserve water for later human, agricultural, and environmental use if the drought continues. Exactly how we collectively do that will be the subject of much discussion in the coming days. To emphasize Mark's point, everyone, farmers, fish, and people in cities and towns will get less water because of the drought. As a result of today's temporary urgency actions, many will get even less than they expect at this point in time, even in this drought. Today's actions are not easy actions to take, but they may be the most responsible approach at this moment in time if we are to preserve our ability to act prudently in the future. We're all in this together, and my colleagues and I on the board will be looking for feedback on what are the best possible actions to protect the public interest overall as we go through an extremely rough period for all. Later this month, on February 18th and 19th, our board is holding a public workshop to discuss how to best protect the public interest with minimal water supplies. That workshop will allow a public discussion of the temporary order that Tom is taking under his delegated authority as executive director, and we also hope to explore a range of other options to respond to the drought. In closing, there will be those who try to pit one kind of water use against another, or one region against another, or one agency against another. That's understandable given the hardship to come, but it won't help us get through this. We will have to collaborate our way through this as never before. But instead of the conflict that you frequently hear about in the water world, I have to say there are also myriad examples of agencies and individuals stepping up to help their neighbors directly, or reducing water use through their conservation, water recycling, and integrated water management of all kinds. Let's call on that part of our humanity in this crisis, even as we acknowledge how tragic a situation many are in and find ways to help. And with that, I'll turn to Tom Howard, the Executive Director of the State Water Board.
Good morning. My name is Tom Howard, and I serve as the Executive Director of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today I'm announcing two actions. First, I am approving a temporary urgency change order conditionally, granting an adjustment in the flow releases required at the state and federal water projects. And the second action is that the Water Board will start issuing curtailment notices to junior water right holders in the Central Valley because there is insufficient water to satisfy all their needs. So I'm going to speak first about the first action. As Mark explained, the change was requested in a petition submitted by the California Department of Water Resources and the Federal Bureau of Reclamation. The petition asked to adjust requirements to reflect what is in the best interest of the public to serve public safety, farming, and fish and wildlife, while preserving the water we have for use later in the year or even beyond. Typically, the Water Board requires that the state and federal water projects release water from their reservoirs at this time of year to ensure adequate freshwater flow through the delta, for estuarine habitat, for fish migration, and for salinity control. As others have explained, the saltwater intrusion endangers public water supply intakes, farms in the delta, and water exported through pumps to users south of the delta. These water flows in the delta are required by a water quality control plan that's been adopted by the State Board, and the higher flows are scheduled to kick in tomorrow, February 1st. The temporary urgency changes I've approved adjust this required flow through the delta and allow more water to be saved in the reservoirs upstream. Because implementation rules are set for more normal variations in hydrology, there are these temporary urgency rules that are available to deal with situations like this in these outlier and conditions, these extraordinary situations. So this is the second temporary urgency change that I've adopted this year. The first one was on the Russian River, and it was actually very similar to this, only on a smaller scale. And unfortunately, I expect we'll be seeing a number of temporary urgency changes throughout the state over the next few weeks and months. So I wanted to briefly run through the four changes that I've approved. First is reduction in the delta outflow requirements that would have begun in February 1st. And the order will require that the water saved by this action will be retained in storage and then released later for drinking water, fishery purposes, and other uses. The second action is the flexibility to open and close the delta cross-channel gates that Mark described. And we're going to manage those gates based on real-time observations of when the fish are moving in the system. The third action is a limit on Delta exports at the export facilities to no more than necessary for human health and safety, which is approximately in the range of 800 to 1,500 CFS, cubic feet per second. And lastly, I'm establishing a reporting requirement and a process to facilitate the real-time management of exports, outflow, and the Delta cross-channel gate operation. Next steps in this process are we'll release a notice of this action, and people will have the right to file protests. Based on the protests, I could amend the order, or the board may decide to hold a hearing to see whether or not the order requires amendment. The order is in effect for 6 months, and it'll be updated monthly or as frequently as I think is necessary to reflect both the protests that I get and changing weather conditions, hopefully. As Felicia mentioned, a public workshop is to be held on February 18th and 19th in front of the full State Water Board to receive comments on what best serves the public interest in this regard, in regard to the temporary order. And the workshop will also discuss other actions that could be taken to address the drought. Based on the comments the board hears, they may give me direction, or as we indicated, they may decide to hold a later hearing to amend the order. The second action I'm announcing today is the curtailment notices to water right holders. With demands now exceeding supplies in the Sacramento and San Joaquin River watersheds, the State Water Board will next week begin curtailing the more junior water right holders in the basin. If dry conditions persist, more senior water right holders will be curtailed as we proceed through the hydrologic year. They'll be receiving similar notices. Right now, the curtailment notices are going to be going to all post-1914 water right holders in the Sacramento and San Joaquin River watersheds. There are 5,800 such water rights. In this case, curtailment means that a water right holder must cease diversions in favor of the more senior water right holders in the system. And this is what's required under the state's water rights law. There will be exceptions for meeting public health and safety needs like drinking water, sanitation, and fire suppression. So I want to be clear, this doesn't mean that anybody's water is going to be, when they turn on their faucets, it doesn't mean the water won't be there. This is only the second time the Water Board has taken this action since 1977. In 1977, also in February of the year, we started this curtailment process. This year is even drier than that, and so if conditions continue, we expect that even more parties will be curtailed. So the petition, the temporary urgency order, and a notice of the board's public workshop and some fact sheets will be on our website very soon. And I'd like to, that concludes my comments, and I'll turn it back over to Mark Cowan now.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for your patience during those lengthy statements. I'm happy to take questions in the room.
Mark, this application was filed 2 days ago?
That's correct.
Where was that made public?
It's being made public today.
Why are you making it public today and approving the changes on the same day?
It's a temporary urgency change petition. This is the usual process. The State Board will consider the efficacy of the decision that the executive director makes during its public workshops later in the month.
So are you at all concerned that the public won't have time to, the orders are taking effect now?
That's correct.
The public won't have time to give any input before the temporary orders take effect?
That's correct, and it's the temporary urgent nature of this decision that has driven us to this. So these rules would have gone into effect on February 1. We all agree at this point that that would be an unwise use of our precious water resources. So we're taking this action now, and we will go through the public process per the rules of the State Water Board as we progress. Do you want to add anything to that, yes, Tom or Felicia?
This is the way the temporary urgency change petition process was established. It can only be used when the situation is urgent the Water Board can act immediately upon receiving a temporary urgency change petition, and then they have to provide the notice when we act, and at that time people can protest. The order remains in effect during this protest period, and then the Water Board, either I can, looking at the protest, can amend the order, or the Water Board can decide to hold a hearing. So it's meant to deal with temporary urgency, and so therefore it's not a system in which there is public input prior to the executive director acting.
As long as Tom's up here, could you maybe give us an estimate of how much water you're talking about that will be held back in the dams and won't be released? How many
Sure.
acre foot? And then for us whose memories are foggy, could you briefly describe us the difference between the junior water rights holders, you have pre-1914 people, and then you have contractors who the DWR is cutting back. So maybe you can talk to us about who the
Sure.
real people are that's being affected in instances.
So at this point, the only water estimate we have is for the month of February, and there will be 144,000 acre feet is our present estimate of how much water would remain in storage as a result of the action of reducing the delta outflows. And like I said, that 144,000 acre feet will be retained in storage, and then the group that's being put together to do the real-time management will decide when is the most appropriate time to release that water for maximum use, hopefully for some upstream temperature control, for fishery protection, for salinity control, maybe even for some drinking water supplies. But the intent is that we're going to make multiple uses of that water as best we can. If this order continues into subsequent months because of the continuing drought, the water will continue to add up and back up and will be saved for the purposes that I've just outlined. So with respect to water rights, there are a number of different types of water rights. There are appropriative water rights, and then there are riparian water rights, and then of course there are contractual rights that folks have. Appropriative water rights are based on the priority in which the right is secured, the priority of the date of the right is secured, and they're generally divided up into post-1914 and pre-1914. After 1914, people had to apply to the State Water Board for a water right. Prior to 1914, all they had to do was develop a water supply, and then that meant that they had that priority date as the date that they develop their water supply. So everybody has a priority date, and as water supplies dry up, we go down the priority dates and curtail people. It appears as though even now there's not enough water for post-1914 appropriators. So that's 5,800 water rights.
And who are these people? I'm sorry to interrupt, but who are these people or agencies?
They're completely scattered throughout the valley. We have a list of them that we can provide, but there are, basically you could go to almost any diverter. Many of them have both pre-1914 and post-1914 rights. It's just a huge number of people.
Can you explain, though, are those cities that get that water? Are those large industrial farms? Are those mom and pops? Who are those 5,800?
All of them. And so that's why, of course, we're making sure that these curtailments don't affect drinking water supply and what's necessary for public health and safety.
Are one of them Westlands? Or is Westlands a contract?
Westlands is a contractor. So anyway, that was the pre-1914. After you've curtailed all of the both post-1914 and pre-1914, generally, not always, but generally, the people with the absolute highest priority are the riparians. And our look at the hydrology right now indicates that there isn't going to be enough for the riparians either if if this situation continues. And then after that, there are the contractors, and the contractors rely on the rights that the projects hold to provide them water, and they also get stored water out of the project reservoirs to the extent that stored water is available.
So, sir, when we're talking, we're kind of mixing federal and state projects, right? So, state water projects cut to zero, and all these rights that you're talking about, pre and post 1914, we're all talking about now federal projects. Is that right?
No, there are, people can secure all kinds of rights. Both the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project have post-1914 appropriative rights as well.
So how do you cut to zero then? That's what I'm confused.
You want to talk
Well,
about your
sure.
contractors?
This is for supplies that are exported from the Delta per contract to our State Water Project contractors. That stands different from water right holders on the tributaries in the Sacramento and San Joaquin systems. So two separate types of actions.
I have a question for Mr. Howard also. What are you going to be doing to ensure people comply with the curtailment notices? Are you going to be stepping up enforcement or inspections in the field?
Yes, we're arranging to have a substantial number of field staff to inspect the diversion points to ensure that the diversions have curtailed.
Can you give me an idea, like how many people compared to typical?
Well, we usually have a relatively small number, but we're increasing it a great deal. I haven't got an exact number right now. I'm basically going to get all of my available staff in the water rights program to do that.
Other questions?
Perhaps a question for reclamation. The city of Sacramento is basically at its limit for how much water, if the water goes any lower in the American River, they can't pump out effectively anymore. When will the water in the American River be lowered?
Well, we don't know the exact time that the American River water would be lowered, but what we are doing as we conduct our operations, we've been meeting with the different cities to see what the impacts of our decisions are, and we've been trying to include that in our operations. So we know that the levels in the Sacramento River have impacts to the cities. We clearly understand also, for example, Folsom Lake has impacts. So what we do is we try to coordinate with the cities, see what the impacts are to them, let them know, and then try to adjust our operations accordingly.
Would you have lowered the American even more by now, if not for the city's difficulty in getting water out?
That was a consideration we looked at when we looked at the American River and releases from Folsom Lake and that. Like I said, we take a look at what the impacts are, and then we go ahead and have discussions and try to make the appropriate adjustments. But those do factor in.
What will the city do if the water goes lower?
Like I said, we're working with the cities. We're taking a look at different options. For example, when you look at Folsom, we look at some of the, if we go below the intakes, we're looking at is there temporary pumps we can put in so that they can continue to draw their water. So there's just a number of things we're working on. Nothing finite yet, but like I said, we just have to coordinate with them.
What is your?
I would just add to that these actions today are intended to preserve water in upstream reservoirs to help ameliorate those sorts of impacts.
Question for Mr. Murillo. What is your delivery estimate for CVP contractors right now?
Yeah, we don't have that yet. What we've been doing is our allocation number will come out in about mid-February when we have all the information we need. We have been going out talking to the different districts, different cities, and we've given an indication because of the dry conditions we're looking at right now. Here's a range of what we're looking at, but we've not given anybody any specific numbers, but they have an idea of what we might be looking at.
Could you offer us that range?
No, not right now. I won't.
Do you think it'll be a zero estimate for the West Side contract?
We have a number of different contracts. We have about 250 different contractors that we provide water to. Right now, what we're doing is just we're working with them all. I don't want to come out with a number and then people react to that number, but it's a wide range. I don't think we'll see full allocations for any of the contractors, but they can certainly go as low as zero, but we just don't know which ones.
Question.
Yes.
I'm with KTVU out of the Bay Area. We're going to have viewers who are going to see this today, live in the South Bay, East Bay, communities that are dependent on Delta water to some degree. Can you put into perspective what it will mean for them or the water agencies that serve them, the announcements you're making today?
Right. Well, again, the announcements we're making today are in response to the severe conditions we're in right now. So the action to take the petition to the state board is intended to help preserve our ability to meet future needs later into the year. So that's good news for homeowners and business owners in the South Bay. On the other hand, our reduction for state water project allocation from 5% to 0 probably does not come as a surprise to those water agencies, but again, just stresses their ability to meet their customers' needs. They will need to rely upon other local supplies, water that they have stored, groundwater, further push for conservation, and find ways to scrap to meet their needs. But absolutely, more stress.
On the fish and wildlife front, any idea on what these actions are going to mean for fall run salmon?
Would you like to take that one, Mr. Bonham?
Thank you, Director Collins. So my name is Chuck Bonham. I'm the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And in response to the question, I think I'd say three things. First, our department's never been here before. So I'd ask each of you and everyone who's watching, listening, to take a deep breath. Put down the arguments we've all had in the past and come together as Californians to get through this situation. Second thing I'd say is this is not about picking between Delta smelt and longfin smelt and Chinook salmon. And it's not about picking between fish and farms or people in the environment. It is about making really hard decisions on a real-time basis where we may have to accept some impact now to avoid much greater impact later. It's about holding back water so we've got it tomorrow. So as to the salmon, we think we have relatively good numbers in the system farther above the delta, both winter run and spring run. Part of the cross-channel gates request is for the Bureau and the Department of Water Resources to work in conjunction with our department, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service to manage the operation of those gates real time so we can best ensure we can move the out-migrating fish by those gates and reduce impacts. As to smelt, right now, because of the hydrologic condition, we actually have pretty low flow. We do not have a lot of smelt in the south part of the delta. There's not a, therefore, risk of entrainment, we think, substantially from this action today. It's going to take all of us, and it's going to take us thinking new ways about old problems.
What are the risks today with this action to salmon? And you mentioned consequences if there were inaction, dire consequences later. Is that the contamination of the Delta?
I think the risks in the long run are greater if we do not take these kinds of actions today because we will need water in the future. We don't know if and when or how much it may rain. To give you one example on the salmon front, in our reservoirs at the top of the system, agencies maintain cold water in those reservoirs. We need to hold that cold water as much as we can to benefit the salmon runs later that may occur in this year or next year or the year after, totally dependent on the scarcity of water. So that is a driver in the calculations we're making right now. Thanks.
Mark, if I understand, you're effectively buying time here by this decision, by saving water upstream to keep the delta functional as long as possible. How much time do you think you're buying by this action?
Well, I would respond by saying I'm not so sure we're buying time as much as we're making a decision about the most appropriate use of these scarce resources. And we believe that those resources are better held upstream right now than used for delta outflow.
Well, by taking this action, keeping that water, when do the impacts in the delta that you're trying to avoid, shutting down the pumps, and et cetera, when do those kick in?
Of course,
given the new parameters you've now set up.
Right. Of course, that depends upon how hydrology plays out. If we get some storms, what other curtailments in water use are actually implemented. Our goal here is to preserve enough water to maintain salinity control in the delta throughout this summer and get us to the next wet season.
How will the federal agencies be keeping an eye on the salmon situation to ensure that there isn't too much mortality there? You talked about real-time measures. How do you know when the salmon are near the cross-channel gates, for instance, or when they need more water to get through the system?
Well, I would just say that we are establishing a process to work together on a daily basis at this point. We're trying to understand what additional monitoring we can put in place so we can keep a closer eye on migrating salmon. And I'd ask Maria or Chuck to respond. Anything else you'd like to?
Matt, I think at a basic level, this could be conceptualized as presence or absence. We know, danger spots relative to the gates, and we may be able to quickly augment our ability to monitor presence, which will then, in a real-time way, inform our decision-making to know how we may operate those gates. Another potential consideration we're all discussing is whether they could be operated diurnally, meaning open at during day, closed at night. That's what we've been in heavy consultation about for the last week, and what we're talking about as soon as we leave this room.
Chuck, given the fact that it's all state and federal water that merges down in the Delta, in the state's opinion, what's the maximum amount of deliveries the federal government should give to protect the fish?
I'm not going to answer that question. Hey, here's what I would say. I'm focused about the decisions I have to make right now today relative to this temporary urgency change position and the consultation we're going to engage in on managing those gates as soon as I walk out the room. That's what I'm focused on.
Is DWR and Reclamation going to submit a petition also for a combined place of use?
Yes, I expect we will within the month.
And what will that
Well,
mean?
within the next month.
What will that mean in terms of all the things you've just described and how you manage water going forward?
Well, the primary point is to allow for more flexibility in transfers between users of project water, of federal water and state water. State project water and federal project water allows transfers without state board approval. Now, given the situation that we're in and the forecasts as they look right now, we're concerned that there may not be a tremendous amount of water to be transferred. However, we want to make sure that we've got all the tools in place to move water to its highest place of need.
Can you put it into perspective the change here in terms of water releases from reservoirs? In the month of February, would you be releasing a lot, and what do you anticipate releasing? Is there a way you could give us a perspective of the difference between what would normally happen
Right.
and what maybe you anticipate happening?
Yes, I think I can, and maybe I'll call on Tom to correct me. I believe the requirement that is in the existing rules that the State Board promulgates would require us to maintain an outflow of something over 7,000 cubic feet per second as of February 1st. Our expectation under this order, we'll likely see flows of at least 4,500 CFS, but of course that will continue to depend upon additional storm systems and how much water is diverted between upstream and downstream.
This I mean a lot more reliance on groundwater.
Let me just pause to make sure I got that right.
That's correct.
Okay, sorry.
On the groundwater front, obviously, that's a source that we'll be looking for more. Any steps the state is taking to monitor or protect that?
We are definitely stepping up our monitoring of groundwater. Now, in a drought year, we expect to use more groundwater. That's one of the great benefits of the groundwater basins that we enjoy as Californians. We expect that we will see problems this year, so we want to have as much resources on the ground as we can to monitor dropping groundwater levels so that we can alert local agencies as to those conditions.
Can I get back to the Folsom and American River system? Not only that, my understanding is February 1, the increases were scheduled to go above 500 CFS. So not only are they not going to be increased, but they will be reduced from the 500 now. Do you have a number, a target that you're shooting for?
No, I don't have that number.
But something significantly less?
I don't know where we're going to end up. Like I said, all I know is previously we were about 1,100 CFS, and we reduced down to 500 CFS, and we had a lot of discussion for that. But I just have not had the opportunity to look into, if we reduce it below 500, how low that will be and how long that will be.
But it will be lower than 500.
I don't know yet.
Could we take a couple questions from the phone?
Thank you. If you wish to ask a question over the phone, please press star then 1 on your touch-tone phone. Star, then 1. First question from the line of Paul Rogers, San Jose Mercury News. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple quick questions. Mark, I just want to make sure the zero allocation that you've announced from the State Water Project, that's for right now, right? And you will be adjusting that at some future date? I mean, obviously it can't go any lower, but if we got rain, when would be the next time that you would make an announcement on whether that's going to ever go up?
I appreciate the question, Paul. Yes, this is a projection based upon current conditions as we know them now. We generally update our projections monthly until we get through the winter and early spring, and then align on a final allocation. Is it May 1? April 1?
Okay. Another question. You just had those CFS totals about what the existing rules are to maintain outflows, the 7,000 CFS normally versus the 4,500. Forgive my ignorance on this, but where are those measured? Where is that point measured at?
I'm going to have to ask for help for that. Do you happen to know, Tom?
Well, the flow is actually a calculated quantity based on the inflows to the Delta, Sacramento River, San Joaquin River gauges there, minus the expected depletions that occur in the Delta. So it's actually a calculated quantity.
Got it. And then two quick questions for Tom. When we talk about the diversion orders in the Central Valley, I just want to make sure I'm understanding that is for basically people who are taking water from existing streams, and it has no effect on groundwater pumping, right? You're not announcing any curtailment of that, and I guess you don't have the authority to do that, right?
Well, we are not announcing any curtailments of groundwater. That's correct.
Okay, so this is just people who take water out of streams.
Yes.
Okay, and then lastly for Tom, the 144,000 acre feet that you mentioned that you're not going to be releasing in February from various reservoirs around the state to keep it in storage. Is that a total number throughout the spring, or is that just February's total, and then there's going to be another total for March that you wouldn't release, and another total for April, and another total for May?
Yeah, it is for February. As we get farther, it becomes more speculative. So we aren't releasing any estimates at this point, though we're trying to make some educated guesses about that now.
But you would be holding additional water back in future months beyond the 144 if it doesn't rain?
Yes, if the order is continued and unchanged.
So what does that mean for drinking water quality for the millions of people who drink Delta water?
The intent of the minimum flows that we are still requiring from the department and the Bureau is to maintain the salinity control of the Delta.
So we shouldn't notice a drop in drinking water quality?
Certainly the standards will be met. That is the intent.
So 144,000 acre feet, that's from a total of what? I mean, how much is still going to be released? I guess that's what I'm not grasping.
Well, I'll ask Mark that.
We can get back to you with that, Paul, but essentially, as I said before, the total calculated Delta outflow will be maintained at somewhere around 4,500 cubic feet per second instead of moving up to the roughly 7,000 cubic feet per second. So it's a math problem to figure out how much water that is.
Can you just give us a rough range on the percent estimate, though? Like you're cutting total releases from all reservoirs by 50% or 75%, or roughly what would that be?
I'd have to get back to you on that, Paul.
Anybody else know?
We'll get right back to you.
Thank you.
All right, next question is from the line of Bettina Buxall, LA Times. Please go ahead.
Could you please elaborate, State Water Board, on the limitations on pumping? I think it was 1,800 CFS, and exactly what that means. And if I understood it correctly, that's going into effect right away?
Yes, starting February 1st, export pumping will be restricted to what is necessary for public health and safety. The present estimate from the department and the Bureau is that's 1,500 CFS. We are asking them to provide us with further justification for the 1,500 CFS. And
so how would that, would that allow any, it doesn't sound like it would allow any exports for agriculture from, through the CVP.
The order is presently drafted. Yeah, that would be the correct interpretation. However, as I've said, it's our intent as we move through the year that this is an order that will be amended on an ongoing basis based on what the conditions are in the system. So I don't know what the conditions will be 2 weeks from now.
And so as of tomorrow, the only water that's going to be exported is basically for municipal needs then?
Yes.
And so that would be for both the municipal contractors in the CDP and the SWP?
Yes.
And if the zero allocation remains in place, that would limit. I mean, how would that change these exports? The 15 CFS restriction that would already be in place.
Well, we will leave it to the department and the Bureau to inform us as to what is necessary for public health and safety. So that would be a question I guess I would leave to Mark.
So this will depend upon a continuing real-time analysis of where there are communities in need for basic drinking water, fire suppression, basic human health and safety needs, not necessarily associated with a formal State Water Project allocation process, but moving water as we can to places of highest need.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is from the line of Alex Breitler, Stockton Record. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, since EPA, my understanding is EPA approves the water quality control plans, is it necessary to consult with them or get any kind of approval for them to make these kinds of changes? Where do they fit into this?
Yes, US EPA has to approve water quality control plans. However, we're not amending the water quality control plan. We're amending water right permits, and the US EPA has no authority over the water right permits.
Okay, and if I could throw one more out there, obviously, I guess this will be for Mark. Obviously, hindsight's 20/20, but there are those who will say that perhaps this could have been alleviated to some degree by curtailing pumping last year. How would you respond to that?
I'd say that we operate the project in order to provide for the state's economy, consistent with environmental protections that are incumbent upon us to consider. We should always be planning for dry years. That's one of the reasons we attempt to deliver as much water as we can in wet years, consistent with those environmental protections, so it is in storage in the places of need. We will always be challenged in a year as dry as this one. So hindsight may be golden in this case, but if we hadn't moved as much water as we had last year, we may have, which wasn't a lot, by the way, we would probably be in worse shape than we are now.
And next question is from the line of Jason Deering, Associated Press. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. I was hoping someone could explain a little bit more for me that just kind of how various fish protection, smelt, salmon that are in place are factoring into what you're able to do or not do under this scenario. Are the mandates still the same given a drought emergency has been declared by the governor? Just a little bit of kind of explanation on how the fish protections work into this scenario.
Well, this is Mark. I'll start and then ask Maria or Dan to comment. We are still, our project operations are still regulated by both the state and federal Endangered Species Act. So we need to have a finding that the actions that we endeavor to undertake here are within our permit boundaries. So that's the reason for the close consultation now with all three state and federal fish agencies, and I'd just ask one of our federal counterparts to comment.
I can do that. Good afternoon. This is Maria Ray with NOAA Fisheries. We are one of two federal agencies that administer the Endangered Species Act. In our case for endangered salmon, we're working very closely with the project operating agencies to address the needs to protect health and safety in this very severe drought. We are looking at the flexibilities we have in our current biological opinions. We did anticipate drought in those biological opinions because drought is a natural phenomenon in California. Our species did evolve to drought. And we have a contingency planning process for drought when we recognize the project operators can't meet all the different requirements. And we are rapidly implementing that contingency planning process in consultation with the Bureau of Reclamation and Department of Water Resources. Thank you.
Other questions?
One moment, please. Looks like we have a question in queue from Kelly Lincoln. Now press star 1. Kelly Lincoln, please press star 1 on your phone if you still have a question. Star, then 1. Okay, that question is from Kelly Lincoln. Please go ahead.
Hello. Would you please go through one more time the priority of water rights so that we understand? I'm confused about whether or not contractors are pre or post 1914, and if they're junior water rights holders, if they're appropriate water right holders, how that all works. Would you kind of delineate that for me?
Yes, well, actually, it's quite complicated, as you might imagine. Water rights are complicated. Depending on, but let's just talk for a second about Sacramento River contractors. They would have, generally, they would have riparian rights, post-1914 appropriative rights, and contractual rights. And so when water is no longer available under their water rights issued by the board, they might turn to their contract supplies. The answer to your question is that they're all intermingled. Is that adequate, or would you like further elaboration?
This is dangerous for me to wade in here because it is terribly complicated, but the state of California and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation are water rights holders. So we deliver water to our contracted water agencies based upon our water rights. So we're subject to the same sort of actions the state board might take as any other water right holder.
Thank you.
And we do have a follow-up question from the line of Bettina Buxel, LA Times. Please go ahead.
This really applies to both the junior diverters and to the SWP customers, contractors. In terms of a zero allocation, which of course could be adjusted upward, is that going to leave any contractors without any water, or is it generally foreseeing that virtually all the contractors would have some other resources to storage, to groundwater, drilling new wells?
So part of the answer, Bettina, is I briefly mentioned in my statement that some of our state water project contractors do have small amounts of storage, of water in storage in San Luis Reservoir that can be delivered to them this year. So that's one additional increment in addition to those that you mentioned. But most of our contractors, of course, have any number of different sources of water, and state water project water is but one, but we do have some contractors that depend upon state water project delivery, so we're going to have to give them special care.
And those are they basically the urban communities that would probably are already on that list of 17 communities, or would be added to it?
These are communities particularly that receive water from our South Bay Aqueduct feature of our state water project, and I don't believe any of them are currently on that list. But again, we'll have to work with those local agencies to better determine what their situation is.
And the same thing would be said of many of these I believe you said 5,800 junior diverters post 1914, that they probably all have others. Many of them have other sources.
This is conjecture on my part, but I would suspect that most of them have access to groundwater.
And are most of those 5,800 agricultural as opposed to municipal?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, next question is from the line of Kathy Busowitz, Press Democrat. Please go ahead.
Hi, my question is for Tom Howard. You mentioned the previous action related to the Russian River, and I assume you were talking about the warning that came out about a week ago. I just wanted to clarify briefly just that the announcements today, they don't impact the Russian River watershed or Sonoma County, Mendocino County, Napa, that area. Is that right?
No, it doesn't affect them. About 3 weeks ago, we adopted a temporary urgency change petition for Sonoma County Water Agency so that they could retain water in Lake Mendocino and reduce their fishery protection for now so that water would be available in the Russian River for fisheries later in the year.
Okay, thanks.
I think we've got time for one more question here in the room.
Mark, I had a question. We all know you guys, the State Water Project delivers the water and then it's sold down the stream. Does the governor or the DWR have any legal authority to order mandatory rationing, and if you do, where does that lie?
Well, we're very focused on the actions that we've been developing over the last couple of days, and we really want to keep attention on that. We will consider other tools and other actions that may be necessary in the future.
But I'm not asking whether you would exercise it. What I'm asking is, do you have that authority down the road, and if you do, where do you base that authority?
I think that's a subject we'll have to further develop ourselves.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much. If you have any more questions, you can call me, Richard Stapler, at the Resources Agency, 653-9402, or Nancy Vogel, Department of Water Resources, 651-7512. Also, State Water Resources Control Board, I don't know George's phone number, nor can I pronounce his last name.
But I don't know the number.
Yeah. So,
it'll be on our press release.
Just let us know if you have any questions. We can patch you through to whoever you need. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone on the phone.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that does